Welcome back, sports card enthusiasts. You're listening to the Collectibles Corner, the go-to place for everything related to sports cards and collectibles. I'm Sarah, your host, and today we've got an exciting and somewhat controversial topic that's been buzzing around the hobby world: the shift from game-worn memorabilia cards to event-worn and player-worn cards. As collectors, we've all seen this shift in recent years, but how did it happen, and more importantly, why did we let it happen? If you've been collecting since around 2011 like I have, you'll know that game-worn patches and jerseys used to dominate the sports card world. But now, it seems like event-worn and player-worn materials are becoming the norm, and collectors are still snapping them up like crazy. So, in today's episode, we're going to explore the history of memorabilia cards, discuss when the shift to event-worn and player-worn cards started, why people still go wild for these cards, and most importantly, whether we as collectors should push back against this trend. The golden age of game-worn memorabilia cards. Let's take a stroll down memory lane. If you've been collecting for over a decade, you probably remember a time when nearly every jersey or patch card on the market was labeled as game-worn. These cards held a certain mystique and excitement. After all, what could be more thrilling than owning a piece of history? A patch that was worn by your favorite player in an actual game, a moment that you could hold in your hand. This concept of game-worn memorabilia cards took off in the late 90s and early 2000s as card manufacturers like Upper Deck and Panini began incorporating actual pieces of jerseys, shorts, and even shoes into their products. Players like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and LeBron James made these game-used relics even more desirable, pushing demand to new heights. In fact, by 2011, it was rare to find a patch or jersey card without the words "game-worn" stamped on it. At that time, the vast majority of memorabilia cards featured items that had actually been worn during a professional game, an essential selling point for collectors looking to acquire meaningful and authentic pieces of sports history. But somewhere along the way, things began to change. The shift to event-worn and player-worn cards. So when did things start to change? The shift to event-worn and player-worn materials didn't happen overnight, but it began to gain significant traction in the mid-2010s. Why did this happen? Well, the first thing to consider is cost. Acquiring actual game-used memorabilia became more expensive for card manufacturers. Players retired, and obtaining game-worn jerseys from ongoing seasons became harder as teams and leagues became more protective over their memorabilia. In turn, card manufacturers found it easier and more cost-effective to secure jerseys worn by players during special events, charity games, or photo shoots. With event-worn memorabilia, the materials were no longer tied to meaningful moments on the field, but rather to appearances made by players at non-competitive events. These could include charity events, exclusive photo ops, or even promotional photo shoots. While it's cool to own a piece of a jersey worn by a player at an event, it's not the same as owning a piece of history from a major game or championship. Similarly, player-worn cards feature patches or jerseys worn by players for a very brief period of time, sometimes just for the purpose of the photo shoot that accompanied the card release. These are, essentially, just jerseys players put on for a few seconds, hardly the kind of moment that would be memorable for any true fan or collector. Why are event-worn and player-worn cards so popular? Despite the growing prevalence of event-worn and player-worn cards, there's still a huge market for them. In fact, collectors often go wild over these cards, even though they don't carry the same level of authenticity as game-worn items. But why? It's all about scarcity and exclusivity. Card companies often produce limited-number cards with event-worn or player-worn materials, creating a sense of rarity. People are drawn to owning something that feels rare, even if it's not tied to a meaningful game or moment. For some collectors, these cards provide a way to own a piece of a player's gear without the price tag associated with game-worn memorabilia. And let's be honest, player-worn jerseys are still a connection to the athlete, even if they weren't worn in an actual game. Plus, some collectors just love the idea of having something unique, whether it's event-worn or player-worn. In many ways, the excitement surrounding event-worn and player-worn cards comes from the same place as collecting autographs or signed items. There's a sense of having something exclusive, something that only a limited number of people have access to. But despite the excitement around these cards, I have to ask the question, are we losing sight of what really makes memorabilia special? Should we, as collectors, push back against this trend? Now, let's dig into the heart of the issue. Should we, as collectors, push back against the rise of event-worn and player-worn memorabilia cards? I'm going to say something a little controversial here. I believe there should be more emphasis on game-worn memorabilia. Think about it. These are the items that hold real, emotional value. A jersey worn by your favorite player during a legendary game, that's a tangible connection to sports history. Not a piece of cloth worn during a charity event. Now, I'm not suggesting that event-worn or player-worn cards are worthless. They still hold some value, especially for fans who enjoy owning a piece of memorabilia. But as collectors, I think we need to demand more authenticity. We need to say that the jerseys and patches we collect should have a connection to real games, real moments, and real history. I'd be willing to pay a premium for cards that come from actual game-use material. After all, isn't that the essence of what memorabilia is all about? The chance to own something that's truly special and tied to a meaningful event. So how can we as collectors make a change? For starters, we can support brands and products that offer genuine game-worn memorabilia cards. By purchasing more of these, we send a clear message to card manufacturers that collectors want authenticity. We can also get vocal in forums, social media groups, and at conventions, pushing for a return to more game-worn memorabilia cards. Key future of sports memorabilia cards. Looking forward, what does the future of memorabilia cards look like? Will we see a resurgence in game-worn cards, or will event-worn and player-worn materials continue to dominate the market? I'm hopeful that, as collectors, we can push for a more authentic future. Game-worn memorabilia has always been the crown jewel of sports card collecting, and it's not too late to bring that focus back. We just have to be vocal, demand it, and most importantly, vote with our wallets. That wraps up today's episode of the Collectibles Corner. If you agree with me, or if you've got a different take, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Join the conversation on social media, and let's continue the discussion about the future of memorabilia cards and what we can do to preserve the authenticity of the hobby we love. Until next time, keep collecting, keep trading, and always stay passionate about the cards that mean something to you.